As way of a disclaimer, please do note that all the footage you're about to see isn't from the Nintendo Switch version, and that everything you're about to see is also subject to change. Your comments and feedback down below are going to be very important in shaping the experience, so do make sure you say your piece down there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to SwitchUp. And to something pretty darn exciting. Now, Glen and I were very fortunate to have been flown out to Germany to play the new Lord of the Rings Gollum game coming to Nintendo Switch and other platforms. And a big thanks and hello to our pals over at Daedalic Entertainment. By the end of this video, you're going to have a very good idea about what Lord of the Rings Gollum is. Please do remember that the build we've played is an earlier build, and obviously this can't be counted as a review, it's merely a preview from our playtime in around 3 of the levels. What do you need to know about Lord of the Rings Gollum? Well, let's find out.
Sent me, his emissary, to oversee matters in person.
Okay, so let's start off then by talking about the story. Now, we won't go proper in depth on it, but just in terms of maybe where this lays in the lore of the Lord of the Rings story. We spoke to the people there, and they told us that it's obviously set before Lord of the Rings. I mean, anyone that's seen the films or read the books would know that. But we wanted to know why they chose Gollum specifically, and what they said was they felt they could tell and show a lot of the world through Gollum because of how long he's been around and how he moves, and we'll talk about that kind of parkour element later. They just felt he was the best vehicle to tell a new story set within this universe.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because on the forums, and obviously there's a lot of attention on the game, a lot of people wanted a Gandalf title.
Yeah, one of the questions I asked was why Gollum? I mean, because again, you know, if you've seen or read the books, he is an antagonist, you know, effectively, albeit one that has a certain charm to him. And if you know the outcome of his story there, then you may wonder what else they could say. But as I said, they just felt that they could make best use of their environment through this character because of the way he moves. They felt that the best story could be told, and that the world explored through here more so than someone like Gandalf, which I suppose does make sense, but we'll just have to see, you know, exactly how that story unfolds when the game releases.
Yeah, if you look at Daedalic in their other titles, they really do focus on that story-driven element of a title. And with someone like Gollum, he's very insular, isn't he? There's lots going on underneath the surface, and I think they really want to explore that through the narrative.
Yeah, and that's a really good point actually, because another question that we put to them was the choice to pick Gollum because of that, you know, because of his very nature that he has this almost split personality. Will that play a strong part in terms of how the story is told? Because obviously, if you're a character that's a bit of a lone ranger, there's not many people to express your thoughts to, but obviously with Gollum that doesn't apply, and we did see elements of that in the small part that we played.
Absolutely, and I think that's probably the perfect time to start looking at the gameplay then. So gameplay is split into 2 distinct categories, isn't it, Glen?
Yeah, so we played 2 levels of the game, one to kind of showcase each of these categories, one being a more stealth approach, where you're trying to remain undetected, and the other being, as I mentioned a bit earlier, that parkour element where you're traversing the land and making your way up the sides of the landscape.
Yeah, to strip it down to, let's say you've just begun a stage. Some stages give you much more freedom in terms of the approach that you take. Let's take a stealth stage as a good example. You'll be put into control of Gollum quite quickly. There may be story elements partially guiding you, so there is a feeling of partial linearity in that regard. But then you'll be given control of the character, and essentially, and many times we saw this, a few different routes as to which way to try and get through the level. Now, the stealth elements have a few mechanics, things like being able to crawl low to the ground by holding a button down so that you could avoid closer detection from the enemies. And there is also a strangle mechanic, so if you want to take guards out, you can actually do that. Now, we didn't see that, to be fair, did we?
No, we didn't see any sort of combat at all, but we did ask them whether that was something that would be in the game. And whilst I said it is very much story-based, there would be a chance to get the kind of stealth kills, if you like, that you'd see in other games of a similar ilk. So yeah, that will be something that can be used.
It also uses light and dark quite well, so obviously with that stealth side, sticking to the shadows is quite important. I do seem to remember putting out a torch or something similar, or I'm sure there was one. No, I think I'm going mad. I think you had to throw something to distract the guards, and then you could crawl past the light area.
Yeah, that's exactly it. You could throw pebbles and distract people, or you could throw them into cooking pots to make a noise somewhere else, that sort of thing.
Actually, you've just reminded me there of a game called Styx Master of the Shadows. And that's exactly the feeling that Gollum has for me. It feels very similar. If you ever played that from Focus Home Interactive, it was a stealth game featuring a small like goblin creature, and it had a very dark Tolkien-esque world. I think that's probably the best comparison that we could make.
You also have like a sense where you can see where your next objective is and kind of almost see through walls if you like, if you get a bit stuck as to where to go next. What I will say about the stealth, Mark, you tell me if you felt the same way, was that I did feel that it was perhaps, again, it's based on literally one level of stealth, but maybe a little too linear at times. There were times where I wanted to go just off the beaten path and hide here, say, but I felt like I had to do it the way that the developers had intended, which is fair enough, but it would have been nice to just have more freedom, and perhaps we'll see that in the full game.
Yeah, I think that's something that people need to realise, especially it's a Daedalic entertainment game, is that they focus on narrative experiences and to tell a well-crafted narrative, which is what they want to do within the correct Tolkien lore. There's going to be some element of linearity. You're right, it does do that. We did see a diversion though, didn't we, in a stage where it gave you a choice of using the second style, which we're going to talk about now.
Yeah, so you can use that parkour element too, which works, I suppose games like Prince of Persia would be the best comparison that I can think of, at least, in terms of how that works. Lots of, wall running, things like that. And I was a little concerned because obviously, as you just said, Daedalic's main strength is in that storytelling, how they were going to get on with that more action side of things.
It's an interesting one with parkour. You mentioned Assassin's Creed before, and that has that mechanic almost dialed, It's a single button press, you're holding down sprint, and it will move fluidly through the area that you want to navigate. Gollum doesn't do it quite the same way. It does it a little bit more like the modern Tomb Raider titles, where you jump up on a ledge and then there's a very fixed animation that you'd move across. You can kick back off the wall to jump backwards, things like that. It's a bit more controlled in that regard. It's not to say it's a negative, it's just the way it's designed and the flow of it is very different.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I took that as almost like a deliberate intention on their part, because the character is not kind of this stealth assassin as such. He is this awkward creature that has grown into his skin over the years, if you know his origin story. So I kind of took that as the way he would move, still being very agile, but almost a bit awkward with it.
Yeah, completely agree. I think there are some things, hopefully, that they're still working on. I know we saw some alternate routes and things like that. I took a route naturally in the game, and they were like, no, go back. That's not... we decided to change that. I'm hoping that's the case as well for a couple of mechanics. Things like wall running, which is in the game. It's a very intentional button combination that you have to do, whereas I went and just jumped straight into the wall, expecting it to automatically kick in. Things like that. So yeah, I think there's a little refinement that probably needs to happen.
Yeah, I would say so. One other element that we can mention based on what we played was there is some amount of puzzle solving as well. Now, we got to a puzzle late on, and unfortunately our time was kind of running out, so we didn't really have time to kind of take it in and try to solve it ourselves. We were shown the puzzle really towards the end, which was a shame. But it follows the route of, or at least the one we saw, of having to find a set amount of ingredients, use them in the correct order to, cause a chain reaction and make something happen. So I think... yeah, the important thing to take from it really, I think, is that you may be expecting a full-on action game, and say open world. It's not really that. It is quite a linear experience. It is very much story-driven. There are those stealth elements, and some, as we've been told, some limited combat, stealth combat, with the parkour element and that puzzle solving. So it's just about, I suppose, your expectations. If you're expecting full-on action in an open world, you're not going to get that. But you do have small elements of what you would find in games like that, almost pushed into a story-driven game.
Yeah, you've beaten me to the punch there, Glenn. So the last section I was thinking we could talk about is what isn't the game. So I think first off the bat, we can say it isn't an action game. This isn't Shadows of Mordor Gollum. It's very much not that. This isn't an open world title. It's very much more a closed, controlled, but not completely tightly controlled experience, and very much narrative.
But at the same time, it's not a point-and-click game, which was the other thing that I was maybe wondering, are they going to go down that route? It's almost kind of a hybrid of the two, in terms of it takes elements, as I said a moment ago, of those sort of games and merges them into something, or fuses them into something of its own.
Which takes us on to maybe one last thing that I think is worth talking about, and that's and we've kind of touched on it a little bit in the story section. It's the mechanic where Gollum talks to himself. And for clarification, the conversation happens obviously between Smeagol and Gollum, the two parts of him, the good and the bad, essentially.
Yeah, there was a part that we saw where you had to make a decision and then you had to almost convince yourself that it was the right thing to do. Now, again, it's based on one element of what I've seen this one time, but I think this is a really clever idea, but it does concern me slightly, because when I make a decision in a game, I want that to be the decision that I take, and if it goes wrong, it's my fault. If I can't convince myself and I'm forced to go with another decision and that goes wrong, I'll be annoyed. So it just depends how they use that, I think.
Yeah, but I also think you're not necessarily given enough context. It's not as clear cut as simply a good or a bad choice. It's just two different choices. And yeah, they'll have to, I guess, through the course of the game, really work on teaching the player about those two sides of his personality, which I'm sure they will do, because it's a huge part of what makes Gollum Gollum.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, as well as that one I mentioned just now, there were more implicit ones where you would just have to choose whether to wait or go, say, and one would be more of a Smeagol way of dealing with the situation and one would be a Gollum way, say. But as Mark said, we don't know exactly what that will mean yet in terms of the greater picture, whether your decisions will start to weigh the story one way or another, or whether they're more inconsequential. Hopefully they do lead up to something in terms of the main narrative.
All right, yeah, I think that's as much as we're going to say about the gameplay. I think we said quite a lot, to be honest. What we will look at now is the visuals. So the engine side of things, what we saw visually, what might change, etc. So on the nerdy level, which is the stuff I enjoy, we're looking at the Unreal Engine 4 here, but as Glen reminded me just before this, there are elements of Unreal 5 in here. I may or may not have looked into the menus and seen that there's ray tracing, things like that. Now, whether or not that makes it across to the Switch version, I think we kind of all know the answer to that. But what I will say is, having just reviewed Remnant from the Ashes, that runs on the exact same engine, and they've done a brilliant job over there. So I'm hoping the Daedalic team use AI upscaling, FSR, something along those lines, to get it looking good and running at 30 FPS at the minimum.
Yeah, just on a more superficial level from that, I'll take that angle. In terms of Gollum himself, we did ask if this was the final character build or whether they were looking to, tweak, refine, if you like, which they said they were. Obviously it's an evolving process and they're still looking to make refinements as and when they can. So it would be nice to see a few tweaks there. I've got to be honest, the character, it was clearly Gollum. You could see it was Gollum, but it just didn't quite look right. I think he had too much hair, to be honest. But hopefully they'll continue to refine those parts.
That's something that no one will ever say about me ever again. Upsetting. But you're absolutely right. I've got to say it as bluntly as I can, because I think you should. I don't particularly like the design of Gollum. I mean, it might be just a result of having seen so much of Gollum in the films and other media, to be honest, that I have this image of what he is in my mind, and it just doesn't quite do it for me as it stands currently. I don't think it would take a lot, like you say, to tweak him, but yeah, he's got like my granddad's hair and things like that. I'm like, just maybe refine it a little bit and maybe not be too proud about it, It's one of those situations, it reminds me a little bit of the Sonic movie. Remember when that first happened? Yeah. I can see people looking at it and going, oh, that doesn't look quite right. And it might not be that they're not following the material, which they definitely are. It's not what you picture.
Yeah, I think it's difficult because obviously the films were such a huge success and they have almost become the popular culture representation of these characters now. And so if someone ever mentions Gandalf, you'll think of Ian McKellen, But if you make a game of it, he wouldn't. Your Gandalf wouldn't look like Ian McKellen. He would look like whatever the book describes, as best as that, So it's just a bit of acclimatization, I think, but at the same time, there are definitely parts they could improve just on an aesthetic level.
Yeah, and on the subject of the narrative, as we said before, they did actually have a Tolkien advisor who had a PhD in all things Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, and Glen sat down and had a chat with him, and it was just nice to hear how true they've stuck to the original script, to the original book and the original narrative. So if you were worried about them changing things, it's very much in the DNA of the game that they follow completely the Tolkien lore. As far as when's the game coming out, well, we have no idea. We don't know. I believe it's this year, but other than that, we can't speak specifics because we haven't got a clue.
Yeah, exactly that. There we go. I hope you've enjoyed this preview, if you like, of the Gollum game. Obviously, we only played a little bit of it, and we can only really give you as much as we saw, really, with a bit of opinion in there as well. Do let us know if you're looking forward to this game. Is it something that's on your radar? Stick it all in the comment section below. What would you like to have seen? Is Gollum the the character you would have picked for a Lord of the Rings game, or would you have liked to have seen another character followed?
Fantastic. Once again, a big thanks to Renaissance PR and Daedalic Entertainment for hosting us, and to all of our Patreons and members and all of you that support the channel. I mean, it's incredible that this has happened to us, honestly. Thanks to all of you, and for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. I feel like I should say like my precious. My see ya. See ya.